Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 111 of Humanity versus Insanity. And I think it's quite interesting that I should be doing episode 111 so close to the 11th of the 11th. Well, anyway, we've got an extremely interesting discussion ahead this evening. And my guest, I know, is going to have everyone absolutely spellbound. But don't worry if the show isn't long enough and you want more information, because we're going to tell you how you can get that too. But first of all, let me just do a plug for AV 9.1, which is going to be held at the Crown Plaza in Kensington, just on the Cromwell Road, on Sunday, the 2nd of December. Now, the venue is literally right opposite Gloucester Road Tube Station, which is on the Circle, District and Piccadilly lines. So it's very easily accessible from all the London termini. So a full day of event of speeches there, from starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, running through till 6. And so who's going to be speaking? Well, Patrick Henningson, Brian Gerrish, Dr. Graham Downing, Alex Thompson, and yours truly. And the title of the event is Democracy in Chains. And of course, as we literally see events unfold right now, as Theresa May desperately hangs on to the keys of number 10, and indeed the leadership of the Tory party, then I'm sure that within the next 2 weeks there's going to be a lot to talk about. And as is always the case with AV events, it's not just going to be about talking about the issues, it's going to be looking at what we can do to participate in bringing about the changes that we, and that certainly means I think everybody watching this tonight, we know we need to bring about. So that's Sunday, the 2nd of December. And tickets can be obtained from the website, which is alternativeview.co.uk, or the ticket hotline, which is 0207 558 8869. But the hotline is not open until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning after the live stream. So that's the morning of, Friday, I've lost track of days, 15th of November, or thereabouts. Anyway, there's another event that I have to talk about before I introduce my guest, and that is Southwark Crown Court. This time it's not me actually appearing in court or actually even representing anybody in the court, but I will be there to support David Noakes. And you see the picture on the left there, that is David Noakes from his AV6 presentation, which was in May of 2015, about 6 months after he had suffered the raids initiated by the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, which shut down his immunobiotech business. And 4 years on, he has been found guilty. Well, no, actually, he pleaded guilty to producing an unlicensed medicine. That unlicensed medicine, of course, was GC-MAF, which has proven to be an extremely effective cancer treatment. But of course, that undermines the profitability of Big Pharma and impacts upon their chemo and radiotherapy revenue streams. So the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority aren't interested in the fact that it's an effective product. They're only there to protect Big Pharma. So this is a sentencing hearing, and David has the opportunity to mitigate the sentence because the MHRA are seeking a custodial sentence. So the hearing is scheduled to potentially last for 3 days, with sentencing on the 4th day. But we'll see how that pans out. But please, if you can get along there, join me outside the court at 9:30 this coming Monday 19th of November. It's Southwark Crown Court, which is literally right adjacent to London Bridge train station. So easily accessible, particularly if you're coming from the south of England. And, we'll go into court and, we'll see how the MHRA portray their case against David as they seek a maximum sentence. So this is a very, very important case and is a very significant challenge, of course, against the corporatocracy. So once again, that's Monday, 9:30, Southwark Crown Court. And well, there's a map just to show you that it's right opposite London Bridge. London Bridge is just here. Oh, what a giveaway. London Bridge is just here. And so it's literally about a 10-minute walk, not even, from London Bridge Station. Right, well, my guest tonight, it's the first time I've had this particular guest on Humanity versus Insanity. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome Michael Obanisia. But before I speak with Michael, let's have a look at this 2-minute trailer of a film that was released just a few days ago and will be widely available by the end of the month. But take a look at this. Oh, we have a problem, apparently. Technical issue. We'll see what we can do before the end of the show. But this is the title of the film, The Great British Mortgage Swindle. And regular viewers of Humanity versus Insanity and attendees of the Alternative View Conference will, of course, be familiar with the experience of Anthony Carlin, the Northern Irish police officer, or former Northern Irish police officer, who arrested the judge in the courts in Belfast because the judge refused to uphold the law in the eyes of Anthony Carlin, and effectively ruled in favour of the financial institutions. Well, Michael has been challenging the financial institutions for many years now. But before I bring Michael into the discussion, we have the film working. So take a look at this.
In the wake of the US subprime mortgage crisis, the UK housing market collapsed, the reality of which was much more shocking than the public ever imagined. Insolvent banks were pretending to lend money they didn't have.
The banks don't lend anybody anything.
This is my house, what are you doing?
Conveyancing solicitors were giving illegal advice.
The solicitor is like the croupier of the casino. He's dealing out the cards at a rigged table using a marked deck.
Mortgage fraud had been common practice for decades.
You're about to sign this document on the penalty of perjury that you're the beneficial owner of the house. Is that really the case? Because I thought you needed the money to buy the house.
None of the signatures of me and my wife were witnessed by anyone.
Whilst the police violently enforced the selective application of the law.
I've just been bad. Are you upset? I haven't been given a note to your house.
That evil person takes homes.
What are your personal benefits for doing this? Do you get a lump sum or something for everybody you took on the street?
Such crimes are being perpetrated by the very individuals entrusted to serve and protect the people. Something has to give.
Then, when all seemed lost,
You're about to engage in an act of fraud on which you do know you may be.
They call themselves the police, they break the law. You're gonna kick the door open, that's criminal.
a call to action rallied thousands from all over Britain.
I'm asking for some help here, man. They're knocking his front door down, how's that not a breach of the police?
In support of the mavericks who took on the might of the banks, armed with nothing except the facts.
I will succeed against this bank.
The sheer scale of the swindle is breathtaking.
So it's my great pleasure that I welcome Michael Obanisia to episode 111 of Humanity versus Insanity. So Michael, an absolute pleasure to have you on the program tonight.
Thank you for inviting me on, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now that was just a trailer, but I believe that the full-length film was premiered in Nottingham on Saturday. How did that go?
It couldn't have gone better. It was a great day. We started off very early at 12 o'clock, well, a little past 12. We watched the film, and basically everybody who was there stayed long enough to tell us exactly what they thought, and some of them stayed well into the night. And the general reaction was everything that we hoped it would be, in that the end of the film doesn't, it's not the end of the issue for those who see it, it's the beginning. Because that what several people said in their own words was, at the end of TGBMS, they felt like they were at the beginning of some new chapter in their life, because they'd had, well, the clouds over their eyes had dispersed, or they had seen things that they didn't realize before that uncovered or allowed them to find a piece of the jigsaw, which suddenly necessarily allowed them to see that the system, justice isn't obtainable within the system. It is a totally rigged game. And the courts, and this is corroborated by every single person I have ever met who stood on the front line in this civil war against the banksters, the system is set up to protect them from the consequences of their crimes. And it doesn't matter whether you simply ask the judges to apply the law as it was intended by Parliament to be applied. It doesn't matter if you've got numerous Court of Appeal and High Court judgments in your favour. If your argument threatens an establishment interest, you will be dismissed as totally without merit virtually every time.
Well, and of course, I mean, we've actually covered on previous episodes of Humanity versus Insanity the financial fraud. And, basically, obviously, as we are all well aware that since 1913, the banks have effectively taken control of the issuance of currency. And, they are absolutely desperate, of course, to hang on to that. And yet more and more people are beginning to realize the magnitude of this fraud. And of course, the mortgage element of this is very much something that affects a very significant number of people. And I know that, I mean, you cover it in the trailer there, but obviously since 2008 in particular, when we know that the banks were illegally closing down mortgages, and I mean, if they had an opportunity to recover the asset, then they were doing that rather than seeking any means of providing the house owner to keep their property. So, and I know that your workload has increased exponentially since that time. How many people have, in your estimation, have been affected by this fraud literally just over the last decade?
Well, the easiest way to put that, Ian, is that if we work back 3 decades, according to Ministry of Justice figures, over the last 3 decades, there have been 3 million people unlawfully evicted, and that includes not just the mortgagors who were evicted, it includes their families at an average of 4 per household. That's 3 million people. That's 1 million people over the last decade alone. And under the established principles of international law regarding genocide, that is genocide when there is a determined policy by a government to remove people via criminal means from their homes and to leave them on the street for dead with virtually no hope of rebuilding their lives. Is that not genocide?
Well, and one of the reasons that a significant percentage of the population needs to take an interest in this is because, I believe it's a statistic, and we touched on this in a previous conversation, that a very, very significant percentage of the population is just 3 salary checks away from being made homeless.
Yes. The truth of it is that everybody is 90 days away from potentially being dragged by the feet out of their beds, down the stairs, thrown into the street along with their family, dispossessed of all their possessions, and left for dead. That's literally what happens when people evicted say to bailiffs and police and court officers, "But I've got nowhere to go. It's freezing cold. I'll die out here." They have no compassion. They have no understanding for their fellow man. They simply say the same thing that they were programmed to say. It's my job, what can I do? If I don't do this job, the same thing will happen to me. No, this only happens to people because people like him or her say yes to doing an unconscionable thing for money. And that's what the film seeks to change. It seeks to show everybody by placing the audience right in the middle of the stories of the protagonists that the film depicts. It forces the audience, whether they go into the film realizing that they're going to experience this or not, it forces them to feel what it's like to fight in court knowing that you're right and get everything thrown back in your face, and then to end up with armed thugs breaking in with petrol grinders in the middle of the night and dragging you out, kicking and screaming. That is just wrong. Full stop. There's no way around it. I don't care what anyone has to say in an attempt to justify it. That is morally wrong, and it should be against the law.
Now, call it a hunch, but I would hazard a guess that of the 3 million people that have been affected by this over the last 3 decades, a disproportionate amount are in the north of England, or in areas that over the last 3 decades have experienced extreme trauma, with regards economic meltdown within their communities, whether it's sort of from the mining communities or whether it's the car industry or whatever. But the southeast of the country seems to be somewhat insulated, not completely, of course, but somewhat insulated against this this drama, and consequently, the people who are often in the decision-making positions, i.e., in Parliament, this is another world to them, and they literally see this as only affecting a subclass, the lower end of the social spectrum. Yet, in reality, probably even the majority of them are just 3 salary checks away from the experience, and their hubris or their myopia or their cognitive dissonance, whatever you will, actually prevents them from seeing the fact that once that, for whatever reason, probably in many cases through no fault of their own, but once that salary check doesn't go into the bank, then they are in this world.
Yes, it's an illusion of security. It doesn't really exist. It's what we've all been, in the West at least, and elsewhere, been programmed to believe is the way our life should unfold. That we go into the state education system, we come out of it, we get a job, and we work our whole lives thinking that when we get to the end of it, we'll have something left over for our families and we'll be able to live with our families in comfort and security. And one of the most shocking things that I found out 10 years ago when I first started helping people with mortgage issues was the number of people who were retired, especially those who had taken early retirement, who had been forced back to work by extortionate interest payments, which were never in their original agreement with the banks. And then I found out that this was a pattern, and that the evidence shows beyond any doubt whatsoever that the modus operandi of the banks is to get as many people into default as quickly as possible. And the reason this is so obvious is because in their securitization packages, when they sell normally for a 3 to 5 year term to financial entities a book of mortgages, the most lucrative mortgages are the ones they make the most money from, are the ones that they predict will almost certainly go into default within those 3 years. If that doesn't expose what their game plan is, I don't know what does. But just to come back to your point, because it's a very important point about why Middle England needs to take notice of the Great British Mortgage Swindle. Because the truth of the matter is that all of the reasons they think the financial crash of 2008 happened are a charade. The real reason it happened is because they needed a cover for the monumental and institutional frauds that so many people were complaining about all over the country, and it was hushed up at board level by every bank, but most notably the Lloyd's board, including Bank of Scotland, which of course is the bank involved in our dispute. Now, the reason why this is so utterly scandalous is because any litigant in person fighting the banks will tell you that it's almost as if the judges have been told that they can't find fraud against the banks, and then I get handed this summer just gone, a whistleblower's report containing all of the evidence proving beyond any doubt whatsoever that all of the banks and Parliament and the judiciary have been covering up is that the reason no mortgagor can win an argument of fraud against the banks, even though they're absolutely banged to rights with hard and fast evidence beyond any reasonable doubt at all. Despite all of that, the judges never find fraud against the banks because of a deal that Lloyd's did on behalf of all of the UK banks when they agreed that no serving parliamentarian would be declared bankrupt while they were still serving, provided that no judge found fraud against any of the banks.
And you know, a lot of people go, no, not in this country. We're not corrupt. I mean, you know, I think more and more people are beginning to realise that the UK is actually more of a banana republic than you know, many developing nations. And you know, the tragedy, of course, is that you know, where bribery and corruption is, if you like, the way in which business is done, it's done openly. Here, of course, everybody bleats morality, and yet actually their behaviour is the complete opposite.
It is. I'm in complete agreement. And in addition to that, pretty much backing up the point entirely, last summer, I was fortunate enough to be invited to a meeting with Thames Valley Police Commissioner Anthony Stansfeld, who is also featured in the film. And what came to light very clearly is that for the very first time in the history of this struggle, because it is the struggle of the people via the banks, whether people realize it yet or not. That's exactly what it is. And Anthony Stansfeld realizes this, and in his own words, which are words which echo the things that myself and other people on the front line have been saying for years, he is saying these two things. First of all, the judiciary is so corrupt it needs completely replacing. And secondly, the banking system is so inherently fraudulent that we need a complete overhaul. And the only logical step, as far as I can see, which is in a significant way featured in the film, is to change the scam that they've been playing on us once and for all so it can't be played again. It's a very simple way that we can do it, but you need to understand exactly what the scam is. And if I can, I will just start to explain that or unravel it now in simple terms that almost anybody can understand without any knowledge of the law. Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So here's the first thing. To everybody who's watching this, who's got a mortgage, had a mortgage, or thinking about a mortgage, or knows someone who is any of the above, listen very carefully. When anybody goes to a mortgage broker and then engages a conveyancing solicitor to facilitate their mortgage and to register it at the land registry, which absolutely has to happen every time, when they go to the conveyancing solicitor with the mortgage deed and ask their advice as to how they should proceed, everybody, for at least the last 3 decades, but probably a lot more, has been illegally advised by their conveyancing solicitor to sign a mortgage deed before they had the loan of monies from the bank they required to buy the property they just illegally granted a mortgage over. Now, on that ground alone, we can reasonably predict that virtually all, if not all, of Britain's Currently, 11.2 registered mortgages at the land registry are illegal and void, but that's not the best bit, because if it's just illegal and void, it's just as difficult to prove, because the system is set up so these things just never happen for the people. It's set up to prevent these things from happening, so we have to be more clever than the people who devised the system, because we must remember from the beginning, justice is never obtained. The people can't obtain it. Therefore, we're engaged in a long-term game of chess, and we wait and bide our time until the time is right. And in the estimation of myself and everybody concerned with TJBMS and everybody who's seen it, now is the time. Because in the event Britain's 11.2 million void and illegal mortgagors, which basically means the vast majority of the middle class, if not all of them, and people on the outside as well, if those people simply made a very easy application to the land registry, which is made on an AP1 application to cancel that mortgage on that very ground that they signed the mortgage deed not knowing it was illegal, because you can't sign a mortgage deed before you own the property concerned. But better than that, there's a Supreme Court judgment. The judgment is called Scott v. Southern Pacific Mortgages. And it started off in the High Court in Newcastle. It was issued by a one H.H.J. Behrens, who appeared in our case just a few months later. And he basically ruled that nobody has any legal or equitable rights to grant prior to ownership of the property concerned. So when this went up to the Supreme Court, that it was followed by the petitions fought on behalf of the entire conveyancing industry and the entire banking industry, and of course the entire mortgage industry, who were all up in arms saying, you can't ratify this judgment. Where would it end? And Lady Hale, the president of the Supreme Court, said, I realize it flies in the face of common practice. However, it is the case that nobody has the right to grant a legal or equitable interest over any property before they own it. So this is binding upon all mortgage-related proceedings, and that includes any application you make to the land registry to cancel your fraudulent mortgage. That's the first part. The second part is that everybody who gets a mortgage cancelled is entitled to be indemnified by the Chief Land Registrar for all the losses they incurred as a result of that fraudulent mortgage being registered, which in simple terms means all of the fraudulent mortgage payments. Now, in the event that you are a former property owner who has been unlawfully evicted, and you can prove that you have the same grounds, you don't need to apply to have the mortgage cancelled retrospectively on an AP1 application. All you need to do is to write to the Chief Land Registrar or your local land registrar and state very clearly the reasons why you are entitled to indemnity for the return of all your losses on the basis that you granted an interest over a property on the advice of your conveyancing solicitor that you did not have the right to grant as per Southern Pacific Mortgages. The third point is that not all mortgagors, but a large percentage of them, were asked to sign the mortgage deed when they weren't in the presence of a witness, and the witness was later added fraudulently at a subsequent time. Now, what that means is under the case that is our case, my family's case that I've been involved in for almost a decade and is featured heavily in the film, in our case, we proved that if a mortgage deed is not signed in the presence of a witness who attests the signature, it not only breaches the terms of a statute called, it's actually section 1.3 of a statute called the Law of Property Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1989, which prescribes that every mortgage deed has to be signed in the presence of a witness, otherwise it's void under the terms of section 52.1 of the Law of Property Act 1925. That's my dog, and I'll just let him out.
Okay. Yeah, such is live TV. Yeah, it's. Michael did warn me that the dog might kick off at around about this time when his wife came home.
Yes, yes, but this time I don't believe my wife's home yet, so he may go crazy again. So we'll have to
Okay.
bear with that one. Anyway, the point I believe I was making was I was finishing off the Section 1.3 point. That's the Section 1.3 of the 1989 Act point. No mortgage deed is valid unless the signature was properly witnessed. Now, up to the point where we went into the High Court in 2014 with the same arguments we'd been putting since 2010, which had all been dismissed. Right up until that point, the terms of the 1989 Act were not being applied in the entire conveyancing industry. And the judges were agreeing with the barristers, the very well-paid barristers who normally went to Oxford or Cambridge University, and some of them had connections already with the Rothschilds who'd sponsored them through their education and into the law. And what we saw was it was quite clear that the number of people we need to understand isn't that much. But 10 years ago, you were talking less than 50 had any idea
Yep.
in this country about how bad it was. And then 10 years later, maybe you've got 5 million who are asking the right questions. But I think you've got a lot more than that who are ready to hear the truth because they've had enough. This country's gone to the dogs. And the reason it's gone to the dogs is not for any other reason except we are completely at the behest of the banksters, as everybody else is in every other country. And they do this by keeping us in this fake, fraudulent, perpetual debt, where nobody can ever get comfortable unless we are part of an elite that requires that we give up our moral code and become as unscrupulous and narcissistic as they are, which,
It's
of
a
course, I wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very powerful tool. I mean, debt slavery. You know, the pen is mightier than the sword. You know, the pen, the signature. You know, put it on this document and literally sign your liberty, your true liberty away, because you are effectively in debt slavery.
Yes, yes, you are. You are.
So, Michael,
And
we got about 10 minutes or so of the program remaining. And as I did say to you earlier, you know, I knew that one appearance on Humanity versus Insanity wouldn't be enough. And, you know, I have no doubt that you will come back and give us some update. But let's have a run through of some of the pictures, the screenshots that you sent me through. I mean, I noticed that obviously I recognise some of the video footage in the trailer as being from Nottingham, and of course that was the seminal case of Tom Crawford, and I guess that was one of the reasons why the film was premiered in Nottingham. But as I put the pictures up on the screen here, just talk us through what's occurring here.
okay, the first one is that's Michael O'Dara, with whom I made the film from the very beginning, when I drove to Nottingham to meet him, because he had become, in the previous March, the very first man to stand up in a British court, one of Her Majesty's courts, and argue that the banks weren't lending any money and that they weren't engaging in following the law, especially over contracts, which they never signed. So you had no written agreement from the bank. Now, he put that out publicly, and I was already talking about that subject online on various forums. That there were virtually, 35 or 40 people reading at the time. And basically, I developed a remedy which suddenly exploded because it obliterated credit cards in 3 letters, and it's been widely used since then by many people. But there was a thread on a couple of forums that went viral, and there were hundreds of thousands of people who were engaged in this process. And Michael was one of the people who came forward because of this and told me what he was doing. So I went to meet him. And from the very first occasion, we both agreed that what was happening here needed to be recorded. We didn't know how long it was going to take, but that picture there is on November the 11th, 2011. It was the second time Michael and his housemate Remy were evicted in a year from the second property. Only this one, they were prepared to put up probably the most remarkable resistance to that date that had ever transpired. They were organized in every way and recorded it from every angle, had all the law printed out to give to the police and the bailiffs and all of the facts. And of course, as you can imagine, it was totally and utterly ignored, and a violent eviction ensued.
Okay,
Well, that's
so
Michael from his bedroom window.
Yeah, that was 2011.
Yeah, yeah. That's outside the door at the house, which we call the White House, on Staple Street, Mapley. And that particular police officer, the one in the fluorescent jacket, can you see so easily the coldness in her eyes? It wasn't just cold outside. She had just said to Michael, who was behind the other side of the door, banging on it with a broomstick, saying, "This is my house, get away, I don't consent to you coming in." And she basically shouted out through the window, "If you don't like it, why don't you step away then?" As if, well, no, quite clearly, she had absolutely no compassion for his situation, given that they were attempting to violently evict him, breaking the front door in, drilling the locks out, and about to get the riot squad in to evict him unlawfully. And the attitude that you get from them, this is very typical. Not from all of them, as you'll see in the film. There are some nice people who realize that they're involved in something heinous, but you have to confront them with it. Otherwise, they'll just pretend it's not going on.
Yeah. Well, in fact, the first 3 episodes of Humanity versus Insanity, way back in 2014. I shared with Brian Gerrish, and we focused those 3 episodes on the reframing of police behavior and how the police have effectively been mind manipulated to be cold and to have all compassion and empathy removed. And in fact, I can tell you that, even on the anti-fracking campaign, there have been some police officers who have been moved to tears, and at least one that I'm aware of that has been on sick leave ever since their first day on the front line of the anti-fracking protest. So, like you say, there are some that still seem to be able to retain the capacity to be at least human in some way, but the vast majority, they switch off when they go into the locker room. Now, this is a screenshot from the film. I remember seeing this in the trailer, and the disinterest of the police officer here is really quite remarkable.
Yes, it is, and I won't give away what Michael says at that particular moment, because it's truly a wonderful moment of gallows humor. But suffice to say that particular copper was, what you're seeing there is his attempt to completely pretend that he's not taking part in this criminal event. And in the end, it got to him, and we show it in the film when he thought no one was watching him. We saw that it did really get to him, the shame of it all, and he had a moment to himself where it registered. Now, this is very unusual, because normally they just think in tram lines at the scene and then maybe feel bad about it later on. But at this particular event, what transpired was, because there were a lot of people there at the resistance, so many people found out about what had happened on Staple Street that it inspired so many more people right around the country, because up until then there was just a handful of us who had even attempted to resist evictions. But Michael and Remy, at their previous address, which is also, obviously that story is primary in the film, they resisted successfully several times, and at every eviction there were more and more people turning up. And what we saw that grew into the resistance at Tom Crawford's house was it really was inspired by what Michael and Remy and others had done in the early days, because that really was the way forward. If we organize ourselves to resist peacefully, no matter what, and as you know yourself, when you record the crimes that the officers of the state are engaging in, and you know for a fact that you've got them banged to rights legal-wise, when you show people those facts, when you show enough people those facts, that's when things start to change. And that's what definitely is happening now. There's been a shift.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's go to the next shot here. This is also the White House, I'm guessing.
It is, yes. The man on the right is Remy Michaels' flatmate. They were both heroic in the way they resisted, and Remy was basically remonstrating with this copper here, basically saying, "What you doing, man? What you doing? You're acting like a mercenary." And he was shamed. He was utterly shamed. But it was, you could see that his mask came off, and then he looked at the camera and thought, "Oh no, I'm going to be recorded. My kids are going to see me like this, taking part in this," because I'm sure he's a good father. He wouldn't have reacted like that. You know, he's thinking, well, what if this was happening to people I know, my family, my kids? It's just not right. But sometimes it's not right no matter who it happens to. But sometimes you have to frame it through that perspective in order to get through to people when the issues they don't want to face.
Absolutely.
And yes, so that was more of the same at the same address.
Okay, now I'm going to jump to this. Is this the Tom Crawford case?
It is. That's the very first resistance in July 2014, July 21st or 23rd, 2014. And it came 2 days after we won the historic summary judgment over the Section 1.3 point in the High Court with Judge Berens. And even though he did his damnedest to try and stop us doing anything with it, we managed to get the first ever cancelled mortgage in the charges register on that very ground, that it wasn't witnessed at all. So it wasn't witnessed properly, and it had to be cancelled. Now, what that proved, because it was so remarkable, because when I announced the result on the 21st, it had 2,500 shares in 24 hours, and by the time I was so busy fielding so many communications and dealing with so many legal issues at the same time, and I saw that Tom had put out the appeal on YouTube to get as many people there to resist another unlawful violent eviction by the same bailiffs featured in the film in Nottingham. There was something different about things. And when you see at the end of the film the people who turned up to resist from all over the country, from all walks of life, all ages, when you see them there, you can see the looks in their eyes, and they're to be contrasted in the extreme with the looks in the eyes of those policemen. Because these are people who know this is wrong, and they stood up to do something about it. And we succeeded so many times in so many places because of what transpired from 2009 to 2014. But the end of the journey is upon us now, because now is the time that we need to move forward in sufficient numbers. And this is what the film is laying out, the means by which we can do that, to bring about the greatest economic boom in history in this country, and at the same time, the only transfer of wealth from the banksters back to the people. It's the only way it can be done.
Absolutely. So, Michael, we're coming to the end of this 45 minutes. Where can people see the film?
If people go to it's a-fp.net to the cinema on demand pages, you can pre-order tickets to see the film in any one of 24 UK towns and cities. The film is already available on DVD for pre-order on Amazon. So just go to Amazon and search for Great British Mortgage Swindle, and it will be released, as Ian was saying, it will be released in a few weeks on Amazon, on the digital platform, and on iTunes and all of the other digital platforms. And it will continue to tour not only UK cinemas, but also it will screen in cinemas internationally, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, in Canada, in the US, and in Europe as well, because there is such growing interest, growing at an exponential rate, and we've had inquiries from all over the world to see the film, which everyone's saying is going to bring down the banksters.
Okay, well, I'll put the link under the video. It may not be tonight. It'll probably be in the morning, but I will put the link so that people know where to go to either order a ticket to see it in one of the screening venues, or of course to order it from one of the digital platforms. So, Michael, I think that you probably have some help, not least from the other side of the veil. I'm sure that Guy Taylor is sitting very close to you right now, and will be doing what he can to help you. Of course, he had to leave this mortal coil perhaps a little earlier than was ideal, but I'm sure that there is purpose to his passing.
There is a tribute at the end of the film. The film is fondly dedicated to Guy and to 2 other bankster busters who've fallen during the course of production. And as you say, Guy will be looking down, and he'll be with us in spirit every step of the way, because there weren't many who were as vocal as early as he was about how rotten this system is and how it's all got to change.
Well, and I think we all sense that we're on the cusp of something, and we just have to keep the momentum building. Now, I'm going to break with tradition, because under normal circumstances I do not reveal my AV speakers until normally about 3 months or so before the event. But on this occasion, on the basis that you're the guest on Humanity versus Insanity, it would be rude of me not to announce that Michael Abenicia will be one of our speakers at AV10 next year, and by then, of course, the Great British Mortgage Swindle will have reached hopefully millions of people, and the movement to raise awareness of this fraud, and as it brings more and more people into the frame, then it will bring the creativity with it, and we will collectively find a way to break through this and the other frauds that have kept humanity in slavery for far too long.
Exactly. Very well put.
So, Michael, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And we will absolutely have you back on Humanity versus Insanity. Let's give it a few weeks, couple of months or so. Let's get the film rolling. Let's see what builds from that, and then you can come back and give us an update. And we can also at that time talk about sort of the templates that maybe people can start to work with to start their own process of investigation, and hopefully eventually cancelling their own mortgages.
Yes, well, we're organising into denominations of bank in every district registry for that very purpose, and also to bring representative actions against each bank. So there's a lot going to be going on over the next few weeks.
And as is, obviously well established, there's way more of us than there is of them. And as I have stated on many occasions, when I'm up against the unconventional gas industry, otherwise known as the motherfrackers, that they only do it because they're on the payroll. We do what we do because of a passion, and passion trumps payroll any day of the week. So, it's only a matter of time. And, not only are we learning the rules of the game, but we're also starting to make a few of our own. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining me this evening on episode 111 of Humanity vs. Insanity. And I'll be back at 9 o'clock with episode 121 of Fracking Nightmare. You take care now.